Hmm.
Dad,
Okay,
this
I'm
is really
recording.
cottage cheese. It's better than pudding.
uh, I am your host, Michael Unterberg, here as always with co-host Alan Goldman. How are you, Alan?
Hunkered down in my little office in my house.
Yep, this is a Zoom episode, and also here with via Zoom, Benji Davis. How are you, Benji?
I am social distancing.
I'm always a little bit
You're
social distancing, so this is just making it clear.
you seem a little too close to the computer there, Benji.
Well, I want
Yeah,
you
but
to hear me.
Yeah, we're trying to get the best audio we can under these circumstances. So I think everyone understands that at this time we're going to be doing episodes by Zoom, and we won't be up to our normal Ben engineered standard of excellence, but it is what it is.
Well, maybe they
Uh,
don't. Maybe because if they're outside of Israel, they maybe don't know that we've been told to basically stay in our houses if we don't have to go out. We can work from home to work from home.
okay, so let's start with that. I want to get to the political stalemate and how coronavirus is affecting that. But can we briefly go over, that's our main topic, but can we briefly go over what Israel is doing, the rules that Israel has implemented thus far? Where are we?
So I think that that's the major change in the last couple of days has been that basically we've been told if you don't have to go out, don't go out. Stay in your house. If you can work from home, work from home. And if you must go somewhere, in other words, if you have to go to work, so workplaces have to be less than 10 people or less. And you have to have social distancing, which means there has to be enough space in those places that you're 2 meters apart from people.
It's about 6 feet.
About 6 feet, as a saying, right? In other places, if you you can go to supermarkets and essential needs, but again, be careful to keep that social distancing in effect. But I think the big change is really basically stay in your house unless absolutely necessary otherwise. And also, of course, it means in terms of essential jobs, in terms of people going out to work, they're talking about, so I think something like about 70% of the workforce is not going out to work.
And we can't even begin to foresee the economic fallout of this is going to be enormous.
Yeah. Well, look, the economic fallout is already huge. There's 5,000 people an hour registering on the unemployment.
Yeah, it's overwhelming.
I think Israelis will be 30% unemployed in the very near future.
And lots of people are getting put on vacation without pay, leave without pay. That's what my wife and my son are on now.
But they can get unemployment benefits.
So they get unemployment benefits, but again, it's very, hopefully they will get them, but the process to get them is not so, they're trying to streamline, but you're still talking about, tons of people, bureaucracy, getting a letter from your work, it's like, and of course, the employers are trying to do this for everybody. So they're backed up because they're gone down on, minimal.
Right.
The other big thing that affects many of our listeners is Israel has barred all entry to the country for non-citizens.
Yeah, that happened last night.
Yeah.
Oh, and the other ones were interesting because the other ones were like, okay, at this date, this is going to happen. All of a sudden, it just says announced so loud into the country.
What if you own property though? So like I own a property in Israel and I want to come for Pesach and I'll quarantine myself and I can't go to that property that I own.
No,
right?
Because I believe you cannot, because the question is, first of all, they're tourists, and they said even if you can self-quarantine. In other words, Mike, you were we know we don't like to predict, but you predicted in your situation.
Yeah.
When you told your mom to come quick, right?
Yeah, I had her move up her flight because I foresaw this was inevitable. Yeah.
And because it's not just about the quarantining, what I'm sure that they're worried about, even though they didn't say that much, but it's about taking, the healthcare, meaning they don't want to be responsible for, non-citizens, let's say. Of course, if they're in the country already and they're allowed to stay here, they will be, but they don't want to add to that. I assume is a big part of the reason why they decided that.
Yeah, and that's that's certainly affecting a lot of our students and travel in general. It's certainly an unusual, unnerving time
Yes.
that everyone's
Wait,
having trouble wrapping their heads around, that will have massive ramifications for human
Right.
civilization moving forward.
Maybe we should give a quick update just very personally on our, like the gap year world.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have most of the gap year institutions have basically shut down. Some of them are moving to having Zoom classes, and some aren't. I think those are the two. Those are the two groups, really.
Yeah, pretty much. The ones that I think are more, again, focusing on the Zoom for two reasons are, one is those who want to get college credit,
Mm-hmm.
and some that are just trying to keep their, schedules going.
Alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I understand both approaches.
Yep.
One of my schools, it's kind of at the teacher's initiative to keep the Zoom class going. So I did it with like one school the other day. We had like 5 students, and then I asked them, okay, like, can we do this again next week, same time? They're like, yeah, sounds great.
I will say for me personally, it feels great to do a class on a non-coronavirus subject, and just for, 45 minutes, an hour, just pretend to, go to something that feels normal.
It's hard to get them to transition though.
Yeah. Well, we'll get used to it.
Right.
We'll adjust.
As it becomes the new normal.
Yeah. Normal is, I don't even know if we're going to be able to use the word normal. Like, I think things are going to be shifty and changey, and this is a complicated one.
Right. Can we bring up this question? I don't know if we were supposed to talk about it, but we talked about it earlier before we were recording about the fact that now Jews are no longer allowed to come to the state of Israel, not as a dictate of some evil empire, but by the Jewish state itself. And does that mean anything?
What does it mean for a Jew in the diaspora that the state of Israel has barred their entry?
Right, exactly. Does that mean anything, or is it just, no, all countries are closing their borders, there's just no travel, stop like asking questions that don't matter? That's kind of where I'm at with that. And I'm not sure which way to go, as in, Israel is just a normal state that's barring travel for non-citizens, or was Israel supposed to be a state for the ingathering of the exiles, and you literally just said, nah, not right now?
Well, the question is, will that have ramifications on Jewish identity in the diaspora, or just, what does that mean going forward? Or is this just an isolated, weird blip where travel internationally has been suspended? And so it really doesn't have ramifications for the Zionist idea of a home for all Jews.
I think, I just want to maybe contrast it, or, yesterday Israel sent basically an airlift for Israeli citizens who are in Peru, right? There were about 1,000 Israeli citizens or something in Peru, and they sent like planes, El Al, to fly them back to Israel, right? So Israel's going out. As we know, Israel goes a far extent for its citizens when it can, and we kind of always argue, well, Jews are expats. They're kind of citizens who haven't really just filled out the forms yet. Well, but now they're saying, okay, those expats are going to have to wait till this kind of blows over to come back in. I don't know.
I don't know.
I think it's just a blip, really, but
Well, it is when you in conception. That's an interesting distinction that hasn't really manifested itself before, where Israel is treating citizens and Jews who aren't citizens as different when it comes to danger. But I understand conceptually why that is unnerving in terms of Israel's mission. But I do think that this is a blip. To me, it's sort of like, I was ill on Yom Kippur, so I ate on Yom Kippur. Yes, that's an exception to the rule because there's a crisis. It doesn't mean that I've devalued Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur's meaning has changed. I think it's an emergency adjustment. But conceptually, it is an interesting moment that Israel is making a distinction between Jews who are citizens and Jews who aren't citizens.
Right.
Okay, politics?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, without any intelligent or meaningful or smooth segue, what is going on? We know that Israeli. We've discussed often in the past that the Knesset elections does not end nobody wins at the end of the Knesset election. Somebody has to form why am I blanking on the word? Coalition of enough. Yeah, coalition big enough of 61 seats in the Knesset to make a government. So far, the president has offered the Blue and White Party the right to form that coalition because, can anyone explain this? Because they would be able to create a minority government that would be chosen.
No, that's not why. The reason is because they got more recommendations than Bibi, 61 to 58, 61 recommenders to form a government. So Reuven Rivlin went on precedent. He got more recommenders. I'm going to hand the baton over to Benny Gantz to see if he can form a government. That's it.
Right. Now, without
that's how the game works. That's how the game works.
That is,
by the way, I just want to
point.
I would like to also point out that like in last time when we were talking about politics right after the election with Rachel, and we pointed out, even though there was a lot of premature celebration by the right-wing parties, it was clear that they didn't have, the 60. And in fact, that's exactly what happened. And now Blue and White is getting the chance to form the government. But of course, they also don't have a coalition because their 61 include the 15 from the Arab parties who at best will support from the outside, meaning that it will be a minority government with a outside support of 15. So it means we're talking 46 in the coalition and then 15 outside.
Maybe that's
of those six,
Lieberman joins it.
Right. That's six.
Also,
right, exactly.
Who's a random factor.
Yeah.
No, but you don't even need support from the outside. As in, all they need is 60. Is they need if the joint list supports this government to exist, then as the government can never pass any bills, but the only way for the government to be toppled is if 61 vote to topple it.
So you'll have a government that can't get any legislation done, that is relatively stable because you're going to have to get everybody to get rid of it, but it can't really do much.
Right, as in the Arabs would then have to somehow work with the right-wing bloc to then topple the government, and the whole reason the Arabs voted in this government was to get rid of the Likud-led, Bibi-led government in the first place. And then maybe you'll get some sort of compromises where the Zionist part of that anti-Bibi bloc or the coalition will throw some bones to the Arab parties and things they want to achieve, and maybe some policies with regards to the Palestinians, or just the status quo with regards to the West Bank and the Temple Mount, which is what we've heard they've talked about. And in return, the joint list will vote for things to change issues of religion and state, which all of the Lieberman, Labor, Blue and White all agree on. So maybe they will work together. It definitely seems that it could work. But now we're in this emergency of this world pandemic. I don't know how that would look in terms of
what we know right
society.
Now is, okay, in the reality, for Blue and White to form a coalition, they have to join with Likud because they don't have any numbers, unity government. Many people think that because we're in a corona crisis, they have to make a unity government.
They don't have to do anything.
They don't, okay. In order to have a functional government, they would have to form a unity government, right?
Yeah.
At the moment, the Knesset is shut down.
But that's not the Knesset's shut down because they can't agree to form an arrangements committee, and that the Speaker of the Knesset refuses to convene the plenum to vote. That everyone should read this current piece by Chaviv Retegor on the Times of Israel, which essentially gives an explainer for why the Knesset isn't working right now. And it's blaming both sides, and it seems to be rightfully so.
Can we summarize what it means that the Knesset isn't working right now?
Is Alan with us?
Yeah.
I'm here, but everything's breaking up, so I'm going to stay.
I'd like Alan to do that if possible, because he's a good explainer.
Mm-hmm.
Repeat the question then.
Can you summarize what it means that the Knesset is shut down and why?
So I'll try, but again, it's it's an unusual situation. But
Without the details,
essentially, essentially the Knesset is functioning as a interim Knesset from the last election, which means that the Speaker of the House is still Speaker of the Knesset is still from the Likud party, which is actually from 3 elections ago. We're really talking about a year ago when this whole craziness started. So therefore, it's really the Likud is controlling the Knesset, but they theoretically or even practically they could be voted out, right? If the Knesset convenes, then the Knesset could vote, and those 61 people can vote to change the Speaker of the Knesset and bring in someone from the 61 coalition side, right? The blue and white,
while the coalition
the left,
is being
and the Arabs.
While the coalition is being formed, they have reason to have a certain
Yes.
degree of control of who's the Speaker of the Knesset that's going to lead the making of the new rules.
Exactly. And then if they replace them, then they control the Knesset, and then different committees can be formed. Even before the coalition is, and the government is solidified, there are committees which control very important parts of the government. Well, we don't have to go into all of them, but one can imagine, right? And just from military to budgets to all kinds of things that can be convened that can have a very important effect on the country. And it's those details of government that we often don't see in the news and don't talk about, but actually where the real things are happening, and making the government wheels spin.
One of the key ones being passing a law that a prime minister can't serve while facing trial.
Right, exactly, and that's obviously where it's boiling down to. But
they can't even get together to pass laws because there's no arrangements committee.
That's what I was explaining.
In other words, all the functioning of the Knesset happens within the parliament, but the Speaker of the Knesset is the one who ultimately decides whether the Knesset convenes or not. And it's somewhat of a, he has ultimate authority, and so basically because this political battle going on, and the Likud doesn't want to lose the Knesset, clearly the parliament. He's not convening it, and that's now going to be being challenged in the courts, I believe.
But the legal advisor just came out and said that he can't prevent, if the majority of the Knesset wants to convene on a topic, he can't really prevent them from doing that, and that it should convene next week.
Yeah,
okay, so I didn't see that most updated thing.
Yeah, that'll take time, though. That takes time.
Hey, sorry, what did you want to say?
Basically, blue and white is saying we want to get control of that speakership because we have 61 thumbs up to form a coalition, and Likud is saying we will not.
Not to
Yuli
form a
Edelstein,
coalition.
The speaker is saying we won't step down.
No, it's the 61 agreeing that they want to replace the Speaker of the Knesset.
Right,
exactly.
And Yuli Edelstein is saying no.
Right, because once that happens, right, exactly. Because you don't have to replace the Speaker of the Knesset until there's a new government. But they can.
And obviously, Speaker of Knesset is a very, very powerful position in the government that usually goes to the ruling coalition party, and I think always. So that's that's kind of another step. Now, of course, this is all happening within the guise of a challenge, an emergency situation that the country hasn't experienced probably since the Yom Kippur War. So it's all very, I would say, frustrating for me as the little guy citizen.
Well, as the little guy, we're used to in times of crisis, whether it's the 6-Day War, the 73 War, or any crisis, we're used to the politicians saying, look, we're rising above partisanship and forming unity coalitions that work together.
Yeah.
And here we're in this major crisis, and they can't get together and agree on who's going to be the speaker that'll set the conversation to set the plans going of how to address it.
Yeah.
Well, there's two issues. One is the speaker, and then one is the arrangements committee that can, if blue and white gets a majority on the arrangements committee, and they have the speakership, then they can propose a law, all these anti-Bibi laws, which is Likud is what's proposing. But what
But I would say that that's very frustrating, again, in the sense that we're in an emergency crisis situation, and wherever you hold on the Bibi spectrum, on the government spectrum, and from both sides, it's clearly a time where unity is demanded. I mean, you have to rise above. I feel like I said it before, and this is why I feel like the politicians are continuing to be politicians as opposed to being leaders. Leaders are able to put these, take a time out of their politics and get together to try and solve the biggest crisis ahead of you. I don't know. And I'm throwing that out at all sides, not just.
Correct. So putting that
side.
issue aside of, should they be prioritizing unity over the political battle, which I don't think you're going to get a lot of anyone arguing with you. Do you think there is a clear right or wrong side in this argument, or do both sides of the argument have valid arguments? There's this Likud side saying, don't switch horses in midstream. Let's hold on to what it is and then work within our framework. You have the 61 saying, no, we have to switch so that we can work out based on the new scenario. Is there a clear, just purely theoretical, if there wasn't a crisis, do you think one side has the facts and the logic on their side, or do they both have reasonable arguments?
Well,
I think they both have half reasonable arguments. I think the majority of the Knesset should be able to switch the speaker without a doubt. But there should definitely be a fast agreement to form committees to solve the emergency issue of Corona. And Blue and White seems to be refrained from having those committees being formed because of this sticky math that if the committee is less than 10 and if it's 8 or 9, it seems to be the math is in the favor of the right bloc versus the Blue and White bloc. But if it was an odd number above 10, the math goes in the favor of Blue and White. If you read Chaviv's piece, he explains how that math works because the numbers of the blocks are so similar. And it's based on
you're resolving the answer. You're resolving how you think the issue should be settled.
No, I think there could be a speaker. I think that they can switch the speaker so it can be mixed, so it can be a Blue and White person. And I think they should have the arrangements committee be even 5 and 5, so they can solve this thing together. So you have a little bit of unity, even if we don't get to a government. At least they can do it now. That would seem to make sense. So both sides win.
I think what you're saying makes sense, and I think it's a reasonable solution. But I'm just asking a separate question.
I'm a teacher, not a politician.
I'm asking as a teacher now. I'm asking you in your roles as teachers. If this wasn't a crisis moment in history, would you be able to argue for either side that they're making a good case? But I think if there was not a crisis,
I think
I think you could make valid arguments on either side about what's the best system for handling this. I think you could. I think the issue is that's not where we are.
Right. To me, it doesn't. To me, it doesn't matter what it would be without the crisis, because we are in crisis and we're in a terrible crisis. And so in crisis, you have to deal with the crisis, and put the politics aside. So that's why, yes, if there were not in a crisis, it would seem reasonable. You could get rid of there doesn't seem any reason why the parliament couldn't do that. And if we weren't, but we are now in crisis, and I feel like that's what I should be focused on.
I just want to separate
and I don't.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I also feel like a little bit what we shared with on the last podcast about the Corona and who managing the crisis. You have the people in the departments, right? The head of the health, the head of the economic departments, and they're all managing. They're all professionals who are doing it. And I'm not so sure how it would look differently if there were different people at the head. I mean, clearly Netanyahu, who has been the head of the country for 10 years, there's benefit in that. But I think that like a lot of it doesn't feel like to me the decisions are, there's a lot of blaming back and forth. These are political decisions being made. They're not. They're going back and forth. It seems like both sides are trying to use the politics of this for their own agenda. That's what politicians do, and that's what they're doing.
Everyone's doing it.
Right. But it seems to me that those people who are really like coming up with the models and trying to help navigate it are not going to change, in the short term, at least. Right.
Well, that's why
the head of the health department. Yeah.
That's why I think from like an Israeli, to use the Israeli term, tachlis, I don't know how you say tachlis in it. For practical, just a purely nuts and bolts, the sections of government that have to address the crisis are working, and they'll work no matter who it is. But for the sense of national morale and calm, like we're watching the prime minister every night, and I think he's inarguably, I don't think anybody's saying he's doing a bad job. Some nights he looks more tired than others. But I think that in a moment of crisis, you have the nuts and bolts practicals, but you also really do have issues of morale.
Yeah.
And so to me, the idea of switching now, and I'm saying this is not a BV voter, the idea of switching that now seems really problematic.
Crazy.
So we should be keeping as much of the status quo as we can, in my opinion, no matter how good your arguments are on either side. Let's keep that same voice, and work within that system. Everything else should be suspended. All the backs and forths, all the rules, all the everything. I think that's the only sane thing to do. FDR's fireside chats during the Great Depression. I think Bibi's really good at this. I don't think Gantz will be as good at it.
Well, he's not the best communicator. Bibi is the ultimate communicator.
So good.
Also, it's a learning curve. I mean, to come in and start having to like learn the job in the crisis, that's like, that's not a simple thing.
Yeah. So the games being played, I think, are the expense of Israeli esprit de corps and morale. And I assume they'll get over it because it's just so obviously unhelpful. Am I wrong?
I think what needs to just be pointed out, or the dangers of constitutional crisis and not having a government for a year and going through 3 elections and then this pandemic happening, it really happened at the worst time.
Yeah.
We are in a serious constitutional crisis, serious lack of faith in political system, and then this pandemic happening.
Yeah, well, that's what malpractice leads to malpractice and leads to deeper problems. It's
and I mean,
constitutional crisis, but I don't want to quibble on the terminology. But whatever.
Throw into that. I mean, which people may or may not be aware of listeners outside of Israel, is that Israel start using digital tracking for people who have been in proximity to those who've been infected, which is clearly a major step in individual rights and privacy. And those are you talking about in this crisis, and in a governmental crisis and faith in the system and all those things. And those are red lines that are hard to negotiate.
What you really want
over them.
You want a sober, mandated, working body to work out those issues and deciding intelligently where to draw the line, which is exactly Benji's point, which is if you're screwing up the system and you're malpracticing, and when a crisis hits is when you really need that kind of stable basis to make decisions going forward, and we don't really have that in a healthy, helpful way.
Right.
Especially Blue and White's whole reason to exist is to replace BB, and if they decide to work with them, their identity is completely gone.
I honestly think politically, aside from just everything we've been talking about is just like good policy, but just on a political level, if Blue and White tries to switch out BB now, they will lose. They will be destroyed because the people aren't going to stand for it.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Except that we're not allowed to have protests because we're not allowed to get together.
Can't get out of the house. They're tracking our phones.
Yeah, but that's the guys who want to stay in, so you never know. Like all of a sudden, the world will change quickly.
We only have a few minutes left. Are you guys scared about Israel's democratic stability moving forward?
I would say scared. I wouldn't use the word scared. I would use the word concerned.
I'm concerned about democracy in general.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Yes.
In general, we're in a democracy recession, but do you think this is a moment of crisis for Israel's democracy? Or
Well,
is this
I
just
mean,
a bad glitch that they have to get over
We were in
themselves?
a crisis before. It's just amplifying it.
as you yeah, and these kinds of situations can tweak systems one way or the other, can push them one way or the other. As you've noted, as you've mentioned it many times, Mike, in this podcast, and we've spoken about a lot, that anyway, the whole Western world, the whole world is in a shift in terms of democracy and national identities and how we fig that with all the polarization. So a crisis like this, worldwide global crisis like this, can push it in different ways, and some of those ways can be dangerous. We don't know how they're going to go. We don't know what the end of it's going to be, but if it brings in economic collapse, which again we don't know. I'm not saying it is, but historically, when these kinds of things that push societies over, and in the sense of global, can. So I'm concerned that it'll push it in a direction that we don't want to go.
Can I ask you? We have 5 minutes left. Can you read that David Rothkopf quote?
Oh, the whole thing?
I think so. It wasn't that long. I don't think it'll take us 5 minutes.
So the David Rothkopf, if people are familiar with him, he's a journalist, a professor-ish kind of dude. He has his own. He's also has his own whole podcast world called The Deep State. You can check him out there. So this is a book he wrote in 2017. It's called The Great Questions of Tomorrow. And in the introduction, he's talking about a conversation he had with his father when he was a student, when he's in the early 1970s, when he had just seen a documentary about the possibility of global nuclear war and what would happen after global nuclear war. And he was very upset. And he mentioned to his father, and his father responded to him. And then that set him off on a whole track of thinking. So his father, he paused for a moment and stared out into the distance. Well, he said calmly and with a slight trace of Viennese accent, 100 million people, a third of the population of Europe, died during the 14th century of bubonic plague. The result was Renaissance. The Renaissance represented a civilization watershed. It produced changes of scope and profundity that touched every aspect of human lives. The nature of states and the rules that governed kings and kingdoms, the relationship with the church, the fundamental tenets of religious belief, the nature of work and of economics, the nature of war and of peace, even the basic philosophies with which societies embrace regarding the role of individuals, individual rights, the nature of the social contract, the very purpose of civilization would be rethought and changed forever. It was an upheaval that for Europe and ultimately the world was epochal. How was the seemingly distant past, a time that for us is depicted only in the yellowing pages of books and in the cracked images of centuries of old frescoes, have any relevance in this era of virtual reality, big data, mapping the genome?
This is now David Rothkopf talking, not his dad?
Yeah. And an entire world that seemingly has its glued to glowing screens. As was the case during the 14th century, we too are living in what might describe as the day before the Renaissance. An epochal change is coming, a transformational tsunami on the horizon. And most of our leaders and many of us have our backs to it. We're looking in the wrong direction. Indeed, many of those in positions of power and their supporters are so actively trying to cling to the past, and we can almost hear their fingernails clawing at the earth as they try to avoid accepting the inevitable and momentous changes to come. Technological shifts will only be a part of the cascading disruptions associated with the new era. As history shows, these shifts will, in turn, change human behaviors, open new eras to human understanding, enable new forms of creative expression, empower new means of economic activity, and inspire new thinking about the way lives and government and businesses should be organized. These changes will empower the reweaving of the fabric of our lives, much as the steam-powered looms of the Industrial Revolution, not only with the textiles, but with the lives of workers. The rise of the new middle class, the empowerment of unions, the recasting of politics, the remaking of the relationship associated with colonialism, the shifting of the power of nation states, and so many other changes. In every area of our lives, whether we are rich or poor, residents of a great city or a desolate region, untouched by a technology, it seems certain that disruptions on a similar scale are coming. Indeed.
So we're on a bumpy road. We're on a bumpy road to a better future.
That's the basic idea. And the idea is, that is history. History is ups and downs, and the downs bring us to better highs. If we could say it you could
so
say
we're out of time.
A Hasidic, I just want to say in a Hasidic way, right? In the Hasidic way, Yerida L'Tzorach Aliyah, going down in the need to go up. So,
Amen.
but
Thank
that
you,
down
guys.
could be difficult. Yeah,
So buckle up. It's going to be bumpy, but we'll get there.
God willing.
God willing. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Benji. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Mike.
Bye-bye.
Bye.